on the front fenders. 454. Suddenly, with the advent of the LS6, there was a new kid on the block, and he had a very bad attitude. It didn't take long before people on the street started giving 70 Chevelles a lot of newfound respect.
When they went to 1970 and dropped the LS6 into the Chevelle, you literally had one of the most awesome street muscle cars ever released, with 450 horsepower. Even though the car weighed close to 4,100 pounds when it was optioned out, there were very few cars that could beat it. Very few. It would give the Hemi a heck of a good race.
It was very impressive. It was also, at 16 years old, very, very good for your ego, too. There was just something about sitting behind a 450 horsepower car, feeling that acceleration, pushing you into the back seat, and doing it legally, of course, on a track. It was completely sanctioned and very safe.
Driving a low 13-second car on the street is one thing. Taking it to the drag strip is something else. When we come back, we'll take you where the rubber literally meets the road on the American muscle car. Driving a 70 Chevelle with a 454 engine was, as one magazine writer said, like being in charge of nuclear bomb tests. You knew something bad might result if you pressed the button, but you just couldn't resist doing it, just to see what would happen. When you pressed the LS6's button, the torque of the big block pushed you back in the seat, and the RPM started heading for the red line faster than anything most folks had ever driven. Some folks found this a little unnerving, but for most muscle car fans, this was the precise feeling they were looking for. LS6 Chevelles could rip off low to mid 13-second quarter miles right off the showroom floor with some careful starting line technique. Of course, those who just nailed it when the green light came on just melted their rear tires.
From driving this one, it's just brute power. I mean, you're going to turn most of the time in a car like this. You'll probably turn into 13s with it. When you're driving down the strip, it's just like, say, it's a feeling like you won't get anywhere else.
And if the factory 454 wasn't fast enough for you, and believe it or not, there were some for whom it wasn't, there were hundreds of aftermarket speed parts available to make it go even faster.
Back when I was in high school, I had a 1971 Trans Am, a 455 4-speed, a real good running car. There was another gentleman at the high school. He had a 70 LS6 Chevelle. I did pick on him a time or two. Unfortunately, I could get him out of the hole a little bit, baby it out somewhat, but the LS6 would run me down every time. And by the time it was all over with, I had a pretty good knowledge of the back end of that 70 Chevelle.
Despite its prowess on the drag strip, the ss454 Chevelle really earned its reputation on the street. In 1970, the street is where the action was, and when the sun went down, the streets filled with cruisers.
A little young fella in a Mustang came up beside me, and he looked over and he said, "You want to run that thing, old man?" I said, "Yeah, matter of fact, I do." So he caught up with me finally at the next red light. And he said, "You don't have a 350 in that car." I said, "Son, you never asked me what I had in it."
Part of the reason SS Chevelles enjoyed this king of the street reputation was sheer numbers. By 1970, Chevy had sold close to 400,000 Super Sport Chevelles, including almost 9,000 SS454 Chevelles in both LS5 and LS6 trim. No matter where you went, you were probably surrounded by Super Sports. The SS454 Chevelle continued in 1971, but it was definitely not a ground pounder anymore. The years after 1970 were particularly hard on the Super Sport Chevelle. The 71 SS454 still looked racy. The wide stripes and power bulge hood were still there, but all the excitement was gone.
With the advent of safety concerns, emissions concerns, fuel economy, things of that nature. Really, that was the death knell for the American supercar, the American muscle car.
Chevy had planned to reissue a low-compression LS6 with a 425 horsepower rating, but the engine just didn't perform well enough. Burdened by all this, Chevy finally gave in and axed the LS6 from the lineup.
These days, a car has to get 25 or 30 miles to the gallon, or else there's a big tax placed on the manufacturer. Cars have to be very safe. You should be able to run a car through a group of trees and not harm the passengers. They can't really stretch their imaginations as much as they did, I think, back in the good old days when you could go down and buy a V8 rear-wheel drive car that would seat four comfortably.
The Chevelle Super Sport is the best example of what Chevrolet was all about during the muscle car era. Chevrolet found out what the young car buyer wanted: tons of horsepower without a lot of frills. The SS Chevelle stayed at the top of the muscle car pack by always giving their customers these things at a price they could afford.
My son and I built this car together. When we got it, it was a total basket case. The interior looked like rats had been living in it for a couple of years. But my son and I, we're real close, and we used this car to spend our time down in the garage and just rebuilt it. I hate to see these cars be torn up and done away with because they don't make them like this anymore.
A lot of people know and heard of the cars, but actually have never seen a Z16. And I love taking it to the shows and talking to people. That's what I enjoy doing.
They're always the people that want that special car and go to the show, have something unique and win first place. They enjoy it. It's like playing golf. It's like playing tennis. It's what you enjoy doing on a pretty Saturday or Sunday.
As the years have gone by, it's definitely fun to look back and say, I had a car like that when I was younger. There's a bit of reliving your childhood built into that, of course, and that's part of the fun of ownership of an early car.
There's a thing that happens to muscle car owners today that's a bit of a payback for all the sweat, the hard labor, and the cost of restoring an old car. No matter where they go, they always hear the same thing.
They come up and say they used to have one just like this.
It feels good to hear that, and chances are, if you're a Chevelle owner, the person you're talking to probably did have one just like it.
I was 13 years old in 1967 when this car first came out. And the first time I saw it, it was a Marina blue car, and I said, when I turn 16 or 17, I've got to have that car. It was basically just an obsession of mine. I had posters all over my walls that Chevrolet had in the magazines promoting this car, and it was just something that I had to have.
As long as people with this kind of dedication are still around, these wonderful cars will never die. Thanks for watching, and please remember, don't crush them, restore them.